A couple of videos ago, when I was bottling tomatoes, I mentioned that I would come back and talk to you about storage. Now, over the last 12 months or a little bit more, I've been working on creating this underground cellar. And I really wanted to talk to you about whether this was a worthwhile exercise and alternatives that you might want to implement, and also how I intend to utilise this space. I suppose, like many people, I always had the somewhat romantic notion that I would like to have an underground cellar as food storage. And while sometimes you might refer to it as a root cellar, though root cellars tend to need to be a little bit more damp than what I have created here, because what I want to store in this space is bottled preserves, fresh fruit, while it is waiting to be processed in some way. And also it then doubles as space for storage of empty containers that are going to have like empty bottles that are then going to have the fruit in them. I also had another reason to want to come underground, and that really isn't part of this video or relevant to storage of food. This is reasonably dry but cool, and I keep it relatively dry by effectively removing the moisture coming in from the outside and also maintaining daily airflow so that it doesn't build up a lot of cold, wet feeling. But you need a little bit of that if you've got root vegetables particularly, and so in those instances you probably wouldn't do what I have done and have a concrete floor. You would probably leave it as soil so the moisture came out of the soil. So let's first have a look at what I've got here. As you can see, I've got apples here in bins that have been picked over the last week or so, and these, like these Golden Delicious, are not really fully ripe yet, but they will keep longer being picked at this stage. They're a nice cool temperature. The temperature in here is at the moment staying at a reasonably consistent around 14-15 degrees. I would like that to be lower, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. I want to slowly ripen these. We will use some fresh. We may bottle some. I also want to dry a lot of these, so as they ripen I'll take them out and process them to dry them. But being able to hold them here rather than leave them on the tree where they would all ripen at once and quite quickly makes it a lot easier for me, so that I don't have to process them all in one go. Here I can successively take them out and process them as they ripen. On the left hand side here I've got Jonagold apples. Now these we largely use as fresh eating apples and give them to friends and so on. They're a really beautiful apple. We really enjoy those, and there's lots more of those still on the tree. Basically I pick them as they come close to ripeness, bring them in here, which then holds them for a longer period. I also have down here the tomatoes, example that I did a couple of weeks ago, also other fruits that have been bottled this season, and being in here keeps them at a nice stable temperature, and it means that they will keep really well. Also, of course, when the lights are not on, this is really dark, and dark storage is also really good for bottled food. In bins here I also have wheat, mostly feed wheat, but also some wheat for us, and that's nice cool storage for the grain. Being in bins, it's sealed and it keeps dry, and so will keep fresh for a good long period. A lot of this is still empty bottles and containers for use that are over the next few months as we process apples will be filled, and other things as you make jams and things like that you use some of these bottles, and as you then empty them, you cycle them back into some form of storage. Previously, I've been storing them in an attic, which was difficult to access, and so this is much easier to come in and access. I will also store potatoes in here to some degree at certain stages. At this time of the year, I tend to keep the potatoes in the ground, and I can keep them in the ground here up until late winter, but at that point, if you're still in the ground, they start to shoot and want to grow. So anything that is left that hasn't been dug and used by that time needs to come out and come into some form of storage. Keeping it cool, keeping it dark. I tend to use these black bunker boxes to store potatoes, and you do need every month at least to actually take them all out and to rub the shoots off to actually maintain the storage. But even though this wasn't finished, I did manage to use it for potatoes last winter, and I kept potatoes right up until January in here. So quite a few months with that regular processing. Okay, construction of this, which people will be interested in. This is a 4 by 3 meter space, and I began by digging a hole. Basically, I started with my tractor, but that was not really adequate, so I then came in with a mini excavator and dug the hole out. But because of the size of it being only small, I couldn't do the final processing of the floor space to get that level with a machine, so did that by hand, and that was a lot of hard physical labour, putting in the footings and drainage for it. The actual construction of the walls is out of treated pine sleepers. Now, you might say timber, that's not going to last so well. It's basically what you would use for garden boxes or retaining walls, and that's really what these walls are retaining walls. And then, of course, I, having built the structure and the framework, covered it with multiple layers of plastic. I used greenhouse plastic because that's what I had available, and I used buffering and insulation as well so that it didn't get holes in it. But there's multiple layers, and it's been now probably close to 12 months that it's been covered in, and there's been 0 leaks, no sign of moisture at all coming in. I have 2 levels of drainage in the ground around here, one which actually runs below the slab level around the outside, and a second which is basically at the roof level around the outside, what was the original ground level. And so that catches anything that's coming off the actual roof through the soil and garden that's on top, that's coming down, and that goes through the top one, and anything that comes in from the sides then goes through the bottom drains. I built this with a level front access with a ramp coming down, so that basically I can walk straight in. I don't have to come down steps or ladder into it. I did that because if you're coming in with weight of apples and this type of thing, it's no fun really going up and down steps, particularly as you get older. In terms of construction, one of the things that I probably underestimated and had to work to then recover from and reinforce was the pressure that comes from the walls. We tend to think, when we go underground, we tend to think about weight above. Now, yes, that does exist, but it is really not that different for building in climates where you may be working with a snow load. But when you're actually going underground and then refilling it, where you've dug it in and refilling, you have a lot of pressure coming in from the walls in the early stages. Once it's actually settled and firmed up, of course, that is stable and it's not going to continue pushing. But I had to do quite a bit of reinforcing initially. Now it's really good, it's stable, and nothing's moving now that everything's really settled tight in terms of the soil. A question you might ask is how much soil is on top. It's not really a lot. It's only probably 6 to 8 inches, 150, 200 millimeters. Gets a bit thicker and deeper as it goes out towards the edges. It's simply enough to grow something in, and that is really there for a bit of decoration and deterring people walking on the roof. Now, ventilation is a major factor with something like this, and at this point that's really a work in progress for me. I do have several things with this to complete, and my current ventilation involves some pipes coming in up the back here that are under these chairs that come in underground, and that allows inflow of air at a low level. And I have a high exterior vent fan that pushes warmer air out of the top. Now, that is run from solar. This cellar has its own independent solar system, which I'm still working on. The solar panel isn't set up properly yet, but that runs currently twice a day at cool points of the day. So it's running for about 2 hours in the day, and it's pushing the warmer air out and pulling cooler air in through these pipes. Now, the temperature currently this time of the year, which is autumn, is sitting around about the 14-15 degrees, and that's cool. I can feel it on my hands that it is nice and cool in here, and it stays that stable temperature basically all day. It doesn't get any hotter than that as long as it's sealed up, because the front wall, which is getting sun right now, is fairly well insulated and doesn't exchange, and of course the rest of it has soil insulation so that the temperature change isn't great. I believe I should be able to push it lower as the season progresses, and even now I believe I could have this temperature lower. One of the issues at the moment is bringing the air up through the ground like this means that it does moderate the temperature. Now, that's great in summer where you have warm air outside and you want to cool it a little coming in. But in winter, it's effectively warming the air as it comes in through the soil. So what I want to add is a direct outside low fan to operate in winter, so that I can push that cold air that's outside directly into here. And doing that, I believe I should be able to get it down to the morning minimums. So that means in winter it should be coming down into very low degrees Celsius. But as I said, there's still a few things to do, and that's one of them. The other thing is I have been doing some whitewashing in here. I've done it behind the shelving that I have installed. The back wall, I will also whitewash this and make it just a bit lighter so it reflects light, and yeah, it's a bit easier to see when you're in here. The LED lighting I have in here isn't that bright, but it is adequate for what we need. It's not very often that you actually coming in and accessing it, so you can flick those lights on when you need them. But the bigger question is this a worthwhile exercise? Now, personally, in our climate, I don't think, in hindsight, that going underground for storage purposes only is worthwhile. Why I say that is coming underground has a lot of building challenges, requires a lot of extra structural strength and excavation, and this all adds cost and effort. I believe that you could achieve similar temperatures, good, cool, stable storage with an above ground purpose-built building. Now, in years past, I stored my apples in the children's playhouse, and this worked fantastically over winter because the playhouse utilizes the shade of both having a sod and roof and also being in the shade of an evergreen tree. So in winter it doesn't see a lot of sun, doesn't warm up, and stays really cool. Now, it wasn't ideal because the space wasn't set up for it and it lacks the ventilation systems that you really need. But if you were to purpose build a structure, super insulating the walls and putting it in a place where you're utilising natural shade of evergreen trees, I believe you could achieve this same cool temperature and do it at a lower building cost and a much easier process. Believe me, building into the ground is not an easy or simple process. Is it worthwhile building a structure for storage? If you have a large garden like we do and you have food coming through, you are bottling, you're processing fruit, vegetables, yes, it is worthwhile having a dedicated cool storage room. How much space you need, of course, depends on how big your garden is. This is probably bigger than a lot of people would need. I believe this is going to be really quite adequate for our purposes. But hopefully that gives you a few ideas as to what you could do or shouldn't do if you also have that dream of some type of cellar storage.